Hello and welcome back to our special After Dark Q&A, where I'm still joined by Peter Jukes and Peter York. Thank you for staying with us, Peter.
Lovely.
So, just to say a big thank you to our new members this evening, Ian and Nicholas. Thank you so much for supporting Byline TV, as we're always reminding people we really couldn't do it without all of your help. So thank you very much for that. And now to the first question tonight. How do we deal with the type of abuse that we were seeing today in Batley and Spen? We were discussing with Sian Norris towards journalists that Nick Watts, the BBC's Newsnight journalist, had to endure last week. How do we deal with this?
Well, I'll start talking about this. I mean, the abuse we receive is more online, isn't it? And we're not out in the field. And sometimes when you are, it's tricky. And I know our camera team have been out like covering the anti-lockdown protests. You've got to move quickly, keep your eyes about you, and dart out of the way. I mean, it is a competitive space, journalism, increasingly so. You know, journalists are killed all over the place in places like Russia or Belarus. And I suppose it's horrible, but it goes with the job because, you know, we are speaking up for others. And if we're confronting those threats and violence, like Carol Cadwallader gets these threats towards her constantly, I think we just have to support each other and see them off.
Well, I was fascinated by those people because I thought, are they the same people who menaced Anna Soubry? They look very similar. You know, is there an all-purpose group of people? And the anti-lockdown people used to say for ages, we've been putting on demonstrations with billions of people and nobody ever covers us. And the moment a familiar face seems to be covering them, they're menacing towards them. Some mistake there, surely.
You also mentioned in the break, Peter, is the legal threats. I mean, that's more of a issue for us. There's a kind of expectation, people just threaten to sue. Maybe I'm only in journalism the last 10 years, so it wasn't that different when writs were flying in the 60s and 70s. Maybe Peter can comment on that. But there is a strategic campaign in America. They have this thing called anti-SLAPP laws to stop these strategic lawsuits, which is basically legal threats to tie up journalists and not, even if they kind of got very little traction, just to threaten them under the libel laws. That's more our kind of day-to-day threat, isn't it, Hardy?
The fascinating thing is that before she was blown up in Malta, Daphne,
Caruana
name, received 2 SLAPP orders from high-priced London lawyers. Wouldn't it be fascinating to know who they were?
I think we do know who they are.
About it?
I think, well, I won't not name because of the wrong one, but they have been published. And I think in Malta it's a criminal charge libel. And she had something like 400 libel suits, but also some in the London courts brought by high class.
London, because it has the appropriate skills, London is the centre of slapping.
Yeah.
I think one of the most damaging things about this confected culture war, which is being led from the very top of government really, is that it's creating a wider environment in which the appearance is that progress will be rolled back. And I think in that sort of cauldron where everything is apparently bubbling up and there's all these divisions about all these different issues, it sort of gives a currency to the types of scenes that we saw today on the streets of Batley and Spen, in that there's almost a license to say, well, everyone needs to get irate about this issue and we have a right to go and shout at people and hurl abuse, and this is just the part of the society in which we're now living. And I think that's something that's really concerning, and the question is, how do we tackle that abuse? It's particularly problematic, I think, when that environment is being fostered from the very top of government.
Yeah, and I think with one point, you know, which I'm slightly so insouciant about, you know, would we face it off, a lot of these targets are women. I mean, either online, obviously with Jo Cox, and now this sort of abuse hurled at her sister. And I think that's a lot of, you write about this, and so does Sian, who's still in the studio if anybody's got any questions. Toxic masculinity, these men feel threatened and left behind, you know. So I think there's a lot of psychological issues going on there too.
So the next question is from Joe, who asks, is GB News going to last? It's had so many technical failings. It's £60 million cost, and its viewers have already halved. Is it a long-term project? Can it really survive?
Yeah, look, they can afford to survive. This is chump change to the people who are doing it, who are in it for a variety of reasons, but it doesn't look like a clear commercial project. If Murdoch didn't want to be in there, in that same space, with much greater facilities, much greater back office to do it, he could have done it much more cheaply. You think it's not primarily a brilliant commercial idea.
I mean, I'm mixed feelings about this. So just be clear about the investors beyond the Discovery Malone guy, though I'm told he hasn't got a huge portion, but Paul Marshall of the hedge fund Waste Marshall. Now, he and his partner Waste made, I think, it's about 300 million out of Brexit. I think they used to fund the Unheard site. I think they had set up a trust for that. And it's clearly a thing rich people do. I'd say oligarchs do. They do this in Russia and Ukraine. Is what do you want next? Well, I've got a yacht. I've got, the racetrack and the racehorses. I think the best thing to cover my arse, after dark I can use that phrase, is have a media station. That they do that. But that's the obvious route, you kind of, you have it's a lever of power. It's always mixed with Murdoch, where the power matters more than the money, or the money enables the power enables the money. Is it because he's got politicians in his beck and call, he can make the business, or does he have the business to get Michael Gove sort of eating breadcrumbs out of his hand? It's not clear. But I would say, one thing I'd say is that some of those investors will want money back. It's very expensive. That's 65 million I think they got for 2 years. They are burning through that fast. Salaries, staff and things like that. So it would be very interesting. You can see how a website can survive as a propaganda outfit or an online AstroTurf campaign. But I'm not sure how a TV station can survive as that.
Lewis asks, if Matt Hancock has escaped resignation again, is there anything that might force him out of his actual job? Would he actually resign over anything?
I think we should turn that question around to you, Hardy. What do you think?
No, I don't think he has to resign over anything. Obviously I think he should resign, but I don't think there is anything in our unwritten constitution which actually compels a minister to resign if he doesn't want to. There's nothing to compel people to stick to the ministerial code. There's nothing that says that the Prime Minister must expect his ministers to take responsibility or place himself under accountability. And this is really the weakness at the heart of the British state, that it's all been sort of carrying on with norms and conventions of how people should behave. And that's fine if you have people in power who will go along with those sort of norms. And when you get people for whom those norms mean nothing, there's really very little to force them to do things that the public would regard as democratic, as accountable. And this is where it is really interesting with regards to America. I mean, they've just seen through an era of Donald Trump. And actually, we have various debates about the extent to which Biden is really going to be a pillar of change or just sort of a temporary reprieve. But the guardrails of the American system, they did hold. They do have rigid checks and balances. And I think, at the end of the day, Trump could claim all he wanted that the election was stolen from him, but officials would not do something that was unconstitutional. I don't think we have anything like that in this country.
So Peter, I'd ask Peter, because I remember back in the day, Hardy, in our sunny youth, when a minister did something wrong, like Leon Britton nearly had to resign over lying about Westland. This is in the 80s, and obviously ministers resigned regularly over affairs in the summer of sleaze in the 90s. But what happened? I don't think it exists anymore. As I was told, as like a TV viewer, there were these grandees, the Tory grandees, somewhere sitting around in the shires, and they'd go and they'd have a word. and this person would go. Is that true, Peter? I mean,
I think broadly, it's you're talking about grandees of the White Lord generation.
Yeah,
Willie
yes,
like
yes.
White Lord.
Yes. Yeah.
As
Everybody
Thatcher
needs
said,
his Willie.
Everyone needs a Willie.
Yes. That's my
And
confession.
yes, and when you think Profumo practically went off to a monastery after all that, so there are cultural norms. There's consensus. There's cross-party consensus, but when those norms are broken, they're usually broken from the right, not the left. And the lessons from America, I mean, there were actually a lot of checks and balances broken. So, for instance, you've got the EPA run, the Environment Protection Agency, run by a fossil fuel lobbyist, somebody who would wanted to destroy the EPA in the first place, no doubt.
And we had the same here with the issue of Matt Hancock, this liaison, a lobbyist in position in the Department of Health and Social Care, her brother apparently, allegedly, reportedly benefiting from contracts. Those rules. My problem is that, you know, if there is a £400 million contract going, you know, that is a huge incentive to ignore the norms. You know, that gets you over a lot of shame. You know, that is life-changing amounts of money, even if you're only taking 10% or 5% or the profit margin. You can get that yacht. You can get your own Royal Britannia yacht. You can get a passport and go to Malta or Belize or somewhere. And so those norms under globalization, if you like, you'd be shamed in the country club, you know, in the 60s. So people would turn away at you at church. You'd have a hard time, you know, at one of the reform club or something. These people don't care because they're not in that world anymore.
They're not in that world anymore. That's the important thing. When you think, who lives in Belgravia? Russians.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how Matt Hancock deals with the media now, I think, because to give him some sort of credit, he has been quite visible during the coronavirus crisis. I mean, you would expect that. He's the Health and Social Care Secretary. But it will be interesting because obviously he's presiding over these social distancing guidelines and rules and coronavirus laws. So it will be interesting to see how he reacts.
It's interesting. I think the Guardian went that line of social distancing, that that's their headline, it's undermining, you know, public confidence. If the one rule for them, you know, one nation, one team, one rule for them, one rule for us, as the Cummings thing, you know, breaking lockdown did.
Richard is asking, one of the big issues in Batley and Spen has been Palestine. What does it say about our politics that a key by-election issue is about a country so far away and less about local issues? Or is this just the media's sort of perception of it?
I'd say it's a wedge issue. It's a classic wedge issue. I do think, you know, it's used in the Labour Party is very, very divisive issue. Not the rights of Palestinians, the way it's presented as the only thing that, you know, you worry about if you care about world, and a way of attacking Starmer or a way of attacking Corbyn as historically taking one side out there. To me, it seems like an amazing wedge issue, which also plays into issues of religion and race, which it didn't do. In the 60s and 70s, the Palestinian issue was not a religious issue, because Fatah and Ararat were secular, and a lot of Palestinians, people forget, are Christian. But it just seems to me a great wedge issue in the Labour Party.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's Corbyn, it's everyone to the left, and because people don't realise that it's completely under new management, it's an easy smear for the Labour Party as a whole. That it backs, you know, that it's people back people who send rockets into Israel.
Yeah, with that one, or backs a country, the IDF backs Likud or Netanyahu in there. So one way or another, you know, there's no grey area. You're either one side or another. That's how it's portrayed.
Well, thank you to both Peters for joining us this evening. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for sticking around for our After Dark Q&A. We hope you enjoyed this week's show. Do read Peter York's book, The War Against the BBC, which he's written with Patrick Barwise, available from Penguin. And of course, if you are not already a subscriber, please do head over to bylinetimes.com, where if you like what you read, you can support us and get our monthly print edition newspaper delivered straight to your door. Until next week, have a great one. Bye.